Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Dope. The thing about high school movies is often they're not really about what it's like to be in high school. They're really fantasies. They're a Hollywood version of high school, very exaggerated. And Dope is in line with any Hollywood high school movie. The other thing with Hollywood high school movies, since they're already fantasies and aren't really going to capture high school life, they usually have a plot in there that has seriously nothing to do with what it's like to be in high school, and is just really the real reason the director or screenwriter wanted to be making that film in the first place, and shows all the setup of them being in high school for them to do this other plot, which is really what the film's about. And in this case, it's about the weary genre of amateurs getting involved in the drug trade, being forced to sell a bunch of drugs or something bad will happen to them. It's the kind of plot where if you were to describe it to someone, it'd be like, and then this happened, and then there was this character, and you could believe that happened. There used to have trailers in the 80s for films like this, and when someone would have to sit there and explain it, it would seem so wacky. Oh my god. They don't sell movies like that anymore, but they still write plots like that, and could probably do a decent Hollywood high school movie kind of a thing, just a simple character piece, but it's not interested in that. It's gonna do its own thing, and its own thing is a weary genre, which doesn't really work in the first place. And it's kind of stylization in its direction, and these kids that are very much into 90s hip-hop can get you into it and make this film a lot more fun than it probably ever really should be, and that kind of keeps it going. But it ends up being like that fantasy, like that high school that no one ever went to. It's fun to watch, it's a fun fantasy, but in the end it feels very empty because it's jumping around to too many things and telling this plot that's very artificial. It feels kind of like an empty Hollywood stylized movie that's good at its stylization, but not really good at saying anything more than that. Malcolm, played by Samik Moore, who's a geek with his two friends, Diggy and Jib, and they are fans of 90s hip-hop. They like going to school. They want to get into a good college and take the SATs. Malcolm himself wants to get into Harvard. They live in Inglewood, in a rough part of Inglewood called the Bottoms, and they're trying to get out and eventually go to college, until one day as they're riding their bikes home, a drug dealer called Dom, played by Aesop Rocky, asks Malcolm to come over so he can trade messages with his on-again, off-again girlfriend, played by Zoe Kravitz, and he goes back and forth as a messenger and eventually gets invited to Dom's birthday. And so he goes because Zoe Kravitz's character invites him to do so. Of course, he has a major crush on Zoe Kravitz, goes there, and then during the party has his backpack stuffed with drugs and a gun, and he has to find a way to get rid of the drugs and then eventually sell them so he can get into Harvard and get rid of the heat that's after him. This film wants to act like it's about a lot more things than it really should act like it is. It's basically a genre piece wrapped up in a lot of different things, but most of it is a genre piece. And the genre, it's very similar to the film Go. You get a bunch of people who are not familiar with the drug trade to sell all these drugs and be really good at it, supposedly. It's kind of a plotline that's basically flawed, because if you were kind of a drug kingpin and had an incredible distribution center and had all these drug dealers, why would you then rely on something that doesn't seem like it would plausibly actually work out? And of course it does in the movie. The believability behind that, why would you even bother with that? You have kind of an insurance policy in terms of your workers, and you could just take it and then you'd be fine and it'd be over and you could just shoot them. But I guess no one wants to see that movie. Part of me kind of wants to see that movie. I guess that would not be good for drama and such, so they don't do that. The problem with Dope is it follows that plotline so strictly. I feel like I've seen this movie like 28 times before. It does through the direction of Rick Famuyiwa. He uses the stylization in such a way in the 90s hip-hop soundtrack to make it a lot more fun than your typical film like this, but it's still kind of an empty idea, because you know, like, oh, eventually he's gonna see what have we become. And oftentimes when the cool music wasn't on and he wasn't doing like a bit with his friends or something, I would often feel really bored because I was like, God, I've seen this so many times that I don't really like it. That part of it really hurts this movie because it starts off so strong when you're meeting Malcolm and his friends and learn they have a punk band and how they're into all this stuff that no one else is into and how they're the geeks. That part is the strongest part of the whole movie, and you feel like you're watching something different. You feel like you're watching a different movie, and that's a trick because you're not watching a different movie. You're watching the same old boring shit you've seen a million times, just repackaged. And then it has the gall to like act like it's putting in these messages and things, which really this film should have been a lot shorter. It's directed with some vigor behind it and what feels like kind of a first-time director. And this was kind of a hit at Sundance, and I thought it was a first-time director, but it's not. It's done by this guy, Rick Famuyiwa. Now, Rick Famuyiwa is a director who's been around for a while. He did a film, Brown Sugar, The Woods. You might say that I'm being ageist by bringing that up, but I think the problem with that is that if this was a first-time director and I saw this, I was like, you know, the stylization is great. It feels like he would just become like a boring kind of studio director and he'd probably lose this, even though that's the flavor of the film. It really gives the film its uniqueness. But learning he's been around for a while and this isn't this small surprise independent hit makes me kind of feel differently. Dope feels like somebody who knows better, who can still direct like a much younger director. This is like his 4th or 5th film. He's been making films for a while, films that came out in wide release and everything. I'm impressed with how he can direct like a younger director because I would not have guessed this was a director's like 4th or 5th film. When I started to think about it, I was like, I feel like this is a lot more calculated. And I think that's kind of the problem with Dope, is it's calculated, but its storytelling feels like a novice storyteller. There's a lot of ideas that feel like tangents, particularly towards the end where he suddenly cares about who he is and his identity, how he's talking about racism and things like that just felt like sprung in there, but it just didn't really feel that complete. It felt more comfortable being from a first-time director because you can almost excuse it and go, oh well, next time he'll get better at it. But knowing it's from someone who's more experienced does make you feel like someone who should probably know better, but also someone who's almost like calculating how to do that to get it to work. I will say it's better directed than a lot of high school movies I've seen recently. Most of them are, the direction is a lot blander. I don't think that's true in this film, but it does feel calculated in a sense. I think that works for it, but it does feel a little soulless and kind of explains the stylization. But I think a lot of those directors who wouldn't do that are trying to be a little more genuine, and this direction doesn't feel as genuine because it's not genuine. I do love the soundtrack. It was hard not to tap my feet and like bob my head along with everyone else in the theater who was really into it, and it's probably a cool soundtrack to have, frankly. I'd say this whole film, the only really well-developed character is Malcolm. Everyone else is kind of sidelined and is very thin. A lot of the characters, some are thinner than others. They're performed better than they're written. It almost feels like how a Cameron Crowe movie only cares about its main character. Malcolm is like that. This film doesn't really care about his friends. It doesn't care about his mom, who's barely in it. It cares about its relation to him, and his troubles relating to them and having problems with them is only really about his struggle and his story. I like the performance by Salmiak Moore, who is really great as Malcolm. I kind of would like to see him in more stuff. He's very charismatic, and he's good at playing like that nerdy geek who's very socially awkward, and you can see that in the physicality in that performance. I think could probably go unnoticed when you've seen people like that and they don't know how to act and they don't know how to really make facial expressions in social situations because they're not really accustomed to that, and that really came through with his performance. Zoe Kravitz, who looked absolutely gorgeous in this film, and I actually didn't recognize her as Zoe Kravitz because I guess I was thinking too much of her in Fury Road. It is such a one-dimensional character, and it's kind of like beneath her at this point. Right when I saw her on screen, I was like, man, she looks like Lisa Bonet, who is her mom. I was shocked at how much she looked like Lisa Bonet, and then when I realized it was Zoe Kravitz, I was like, wow, that's the most like her mom I think I've ever seen her look. I'm a little surprised she took this role. She was actually good at it, and I think it says a lot about her as an actress that she could make as much out of it as she could, and I'd say that about most of the performances in this film, especially like Tony Revolori, I think, who is in the Grand Budapest Hotel, and Kiersey Clemens, his friends Diggy and Jib, do a good job. That's one of the things that makes this film work so well, is it has an amazing cast. Even Forrest Whitaker is doing narration at the beginning. A$AP Rocky, I think, does a really good job as Dom. It's a small supporting part, and you wouldn't really expect a lot from that part, but he sells it very well. There's a certain thing about when you have these people who are drug dealers in a film, they really need to be charismatic and kind of give you that oomph, so you understand they're a big deal to that character and they're a big deal to that community. And A$AP Rocky did that with his natural kind of swagger that I think came off really well. There's a lot of rappers who can't necessarily transcend that through the screen, but I thought A$AP Rocky could. I would actually honestly like to see him take a meatier acting role because I thought he did a good job. I definitely had a good time, and I definitely liked Dope, and I think it's a good movie experience. I'll say that. And it is a very likable movie. There's sometimes plot points feel completely brought up. Characters who feel like would never in real life ever be connected in some way had to be connected, which was utterly ridiculous. There are too many plot conveniences to get this plot to work. You can get away with a few of those in a movie, but this film like overloaded itself with that. Everything this film was doing through most of its runtime felt like a typical Hollywood high school movie that's throwing all these complications and things in there that don't really need to be there, which is a shame because the beginning of the film is so strong. The problem is it's stylized. It's stylization and it's phoniness in its stylization. It's purposely done stylization. It doesn't feel like a new director who's really trying to say something, who's always wanted to have this vision, and you can tell that through it. It's like an empty stylization, and Rick Famuyiwa pushes that through and does a good job of it, but you can ultimately tell there's nothing there because it's not really saying much of anything. And a stylized kind of fun so-called independent film, but I feel like only in financing, not in spirit, is refreshing in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of teen films that try to put this thing in this kid's summer or this kid's high school experience that do feel a little overwrought and silly, and I feel a lot more hindered by it than this film does. This film at least has a great cast and enough flow to it that's really interesting enough. I think its dishonesty in what it's trying to do is its biggest flaw, because it had been more upfront with itself why people like something like Jurassic World is a big hit. The reason Jurassic World is a big hit is because Jurassic World is honest, it's a big blockbuster, and very much sells itself as such. That's why a lot of blockbusters are hits and resonate with the public. The public likes not being lied to. Even on a thematic, artistic level, they can kind of sense it. And that's Dope's biggest problem. It's not being honest with itself. Malcolm learns to be more honest with himself than this movie does. Dope isn't really honestly dope. It wants to be dope. It sounds like someone in an old board meeting going, oh, that's dope, right? It's kind of like Malcolm. He doesn't really talk about the politics of 90s hip-hop or what was going on at the time. He just likes the fashion and the music and thinks it's really cool. But really, you need to have a little bit more than just being like a cool movie, and this is really, that's all it is. It's a cool, very flawed movie that's better at being cool than actually saying anything. So if you have seen Dope and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe
if you would like to.